going to go ahead and get started. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ryan because he's going to kick this off.
Great, thank you, Jen. Before we get started, I'm going to go over kind of our goals for this webinar. Through the course of this webinar, we will be discussing the types of resources available and their application for historical research. We will be introducing the Empire State Library Network digital collections and also the Digital Public Library of America. We will demonstrate how to navigate these digital repositories, and we'll provide a brief overview of copyright and usage considerations. So hopefully this is all what all of you guys signed up for. So before we get started, it's important to establish why cultural heritage resources are important. Of course, they seem self-important to those of us who work closely with them in our day-to-day jobs, but it's important to kind of step back and think a little bit more about this. Effective resources can serve to reflect historical experiences and can be used to answer historical questions. So I selected these two photographs below as examples to kind of illustrate this point. These photographs are effective because they shed light on the experiences of workers along the Erie Canal. They can answer questions about the equipment used in construction of the Erie Canal, and inferences can be made about the working conditions and identities of the laborers. And used together with the contextual information that's provided, there's a lot that can be learned just from these two photographs. And as we are conducting historical research, it's important to use both primary and secondary resources. For those of you who may not be as familiar with this concept, primary sources provide evidence. These are firsthand accounts by people who have actually experienced the historical events in question, and this is majority of the materials that are included in the repositories we're discussing today would qualify as primary sources. The photograph that I pulled from the previous slide here is an example of a primary source because its creator was documenting the events in the photograph as they happened. So this wasn't a painting that was done after the fact or some kind of recreation of it. This is happening live for that photographer. There's a lot that can be unpacked from that image, as I mentioned before. Secondary sources serve to provide context. These are accounts that were produced after the events occurred, and they're looking back on events that had already happened. Some examples of this would be history textbooks or encyclopedias. And as we're looking at these repositories, metadata is a really important feature of digital collections. Metadata, for those of you who aren't familiar with the term, is data about data, or in other words, the descriptive information about the objects. So I included an example here. This is part of the metadata record for the image on the left. And this metadata can function in a similar manner to secondary sources because it provides contextual information to help users make sense of what they're looking at. So there's a large number of formats of different objects that are available in digital repositories. Each format offers a different lens for interpreting events of the past. And it's important to select the right tools for the type of inquiry you're trying to make. Digital repositories allow for easy access to a variety of formats, so it's really a great tool for being able to work with the exact kinds of materials that you need to answer the question you're trying to explore. So to illustrate this, I want to give a couple examples. If you were trying to understand, for example, why the Erie Canal was constructed where it was, you might consult historical maps. If, on the other hand, you want to understand the economic impact of the canal, you might consult financial records from businesses along the canal. And this would help you kind of paint a picture of why the canal is important and all of that. A lot of the repositories, especially the ones we're discussing today, do allow you to facet or search by format, so you can narrow your results based on these formats. So many of you may be more familiar working with physical collections. I'd like to go through several of the important differences between digital collections and physical collections. First of all, digital resources are stand-ins, are merely stand-ins for physical objects. This might seem kind of self-evident, but when you really think about it, this opens up some interesting possibilities for using digital objects, and also the kinds of information you can get from these objects. So with a digital object, you might not be able to see, for instance, the wear on a physical object. And you know, if you had a journal, for instance, that had a lot of wear, you might be able to infer how that journal was used or what kind of conditions it had been through. And so it's really important to have that information depending on what you're trying to discover. So oftentimes metadata is able to capture some of these properties, but other times you just have to see the physical object. So all these digital objects and digital collections in no way replace the physical collections. They're helpful in many ways, but they're not. Don't start throwing away your collections just because you have digital objects already. And digital resources are less prone to damage, so they obviously have their own maintenance requirements. We're dealing with files and digital archives. That's a really important area now, but in a lot of ways they reduce a lot of limitations of physical objects, so they can be reproduced nearly infinitely. So you can make copies and reuse them in different ways, and more importantly, you're not damaging the original physical copies when you're using a digital copy. Digital resources are also accessible anywhere, so anywhere with an internet connection, obviously, in these cases. And this makes research much easier in a lot of respects because you don't have to travel to a physical collection. You don't have to travel to a historical society that might be across the country. You can actually experience and work with their collections remotely, which makes things a lot more efficient when you're trying to do research. Digital resources are also keyword searchable, so this makes it a lot easier to navigate them. If you're trying to do some genealogy work and you're looking for records of your Aunt Sally, you can do a keyword search through a yearbook and find the exact portion of the resource where she's mentioned and learn a little bit more about her without paging through many resources trying to find mention of her. And finally, digital resources are remixable. What this means is since you have a digital copy of the object, you can do whatever you want with it, and this opens a lot of new possibilities for using these materials in ways that weren't really possible with physical materials. So if you want to make a collage, for instance, with a physical object, you'd have to cut it apart, but with a digital object, you can just copy and paste pieces of it and have that ability built right in. All right, so moving on, we're going to get into more of the bulk of this presentation. And New York. First, I'd like to introduce the Empire State Library Network. So ESLN is comprised of 9 regional library councils that each serve a different region of New York State. You can see in the lower right-hand corner, there's a map of New York State with the different councils labeled. Each one of these councils works with their member institutions to contribute materials to digital repositories. Members of the Southeastern New York Library Resources Council contribute to Hudson River Valley Heritage. Digital Culture of Metropolitan New York serves as a repository for Metropolitan New York Library Resources Council, and New York Heritage Digital Collections serves as the repository for the remainder of the state. Together, between these three repositories, there are over 300 institutions that are contributing to these projects. And so we're talking about a large number of materials and a rich collection of raw primary sources that can be used in your historical inquiries. We're going through these repositories as examples, but a lot of other repositories besides the ones we're discussing today use similar organizations. So hopefully a lot of these skills when you're working with digital repositories are transferable. So even if we aren't talking about those directly today, hopefully we'll give you some tools to use them in the future. So I'm going to turn it over to Jen Palmentero to do a walkthrough of Hudson River Valley Heritage.
Thanks, Ryan. Hope everybody can hear me okay. So Hudson River Valley Heritage, or HRVH, is the digitization service provided by the Southeastern Council, as Ryan just mentioned. We serve our member organization in 8 counties in the Hudson Valley. And HRVH provides access to digital collections, online exhibitions, and historic newspapers contributed by over 60 organizations. So I'm just going to go live now and give you a little tour of HRVH. Okay, so hopefully you all can see the homepage of HRVH right now. Again, from here, you can access our digital collections, our online exhibitions, or our digital newspapers. I'm going to be focusing on navigating our digital collections today, because that is the topic of this webinar. You can explore collections in a number of ways. I'm going to show you a couple of those ways today. You can certainly do a search for something using this search box at the top of the homepage, and it will search all 60 of our collections. This search box does not search exhibits or newspapers. Those are hosted on separate platforms, but we've kind of brought them all together under this website. And I'm going to do a little searching in a bit, but first I'm going to click on the Collections button from our menu and browse the list of available collections. This search box up here from our collections list does the same thing as the search box on our homepage. It will search all 60 collections. And I'm going to just start scrolling down through our collections list. Our collections are mostly identified by our contributing organizations. A slow scroll down this list will show you the diversity in our contributors, and the collections contained in here are just as diverse as the contributors. You will find collections from all different types of libraries, as well as historical societies and museums. Each collection has a landing page where you will find at least a little bit of information about what is in that digital collection. Some landing pages have more information than others. I'm going to show you one right now. And to get to a landing page from this collections list, you either click on the name of the collection, which again is most of the time the name of the organization that's contributing, or you can click on this thumbnail image. So this is the landing page for the FDR Presidential Library and Museum's contribution to HRVH. It's important to note that they do have a database of their own called Franklin that is available from their website, and that is where you will find all of FDR's presidential papers and resources. Those are not hosted here. From any landing page, if you use the search box at the top of a landing page, you will just be searching that collection at that time. One little trick when you're in HRVH and you see a search box, if you click the advanced search, it'll always tell you what collection you're searching. So sometimes it might say all, or it's just kind of a good way to kind of know where you're at and what you're going to get. And once you know more what you're looking for and what collections are helpful for you, you can do advanced searches where you can search on various fields, and you can search on all the words, any of the words, the exact phrase, or none of the words. I'm not going to do that today. So from this page, at FDR Library's landing page, you can click this link to browse everything they've contributed to HRVH all at once. or you can use these little links down below to get into different parts of their overall collection. We use Content DM, so some of this is very cookie cutter. This is what comes with Content DM out of the box. New York Heritage also uses Content DM, but they're on a different version of the software. So Ryan will show you some of the differences in just a bit on New York Heritage. So you could use these suggested topics to get into little groupings of the collection. And you'll see this on some landing pages, but you'll also see sometimes a link into a part of the collection with a little description. So we're going to go ahead right now and peruse the Pearsall collection, which is a collection of images of Hyde Park, New York, from around the turn of the last century. So when you're browsing and searching through the site, the first thing you see is thumbnail images for the images, the resources that match your search criteria, and a little snippet of the metadata that Ryan was mentioning before. You can browse through your page of results using these buttons up here. There are 78 items in this collection right now. So you could navigate through that way if you're just browsing and kind of see what they have. If you'd like to see more on one page, you can use this little option here where it says display 20, and you can have more shown on the page at once. So I just went to 100, and now I can see all 78 of these images in one scroll. Another thing you can do, again, a lot of what I'm showing you is just mechanics so that you know everything that's available to you. Sometimes these websites can be a little overwhelming. There's a lot of stuff and text and little things thrown at you. So just kind of surveying the landscape when you first come and seeing what's available to you is really helpful. I'm going to go ahead and change this sort by relevance to sort by title. That can be helpful for some searches. And again, scroll down, and we're going to pick one and go take a look at it. Let's look at family and carriage. Okay, Content DM, this version of Content DM comes with some features for that kind of are in the social media and user engagement realm. You can share this item out if you really love it and want to share it on Facebook. You can do that. It doesn't take an image, it just takes a title and makes this nice little banner and tells all your friends, hey, look, cool thing over here, come click and check it out. So you can do that. This version of Content DM has the ability to add tags or comments, and also rating if you really love this item. And this version of Content DM also have what's called a My Favorites feature. And this feature is based on cookies, so you have to have cookies enabled on your browser to work with it. But if you're doing research and you want to save items as you're going through, you can go ahead and save it to favorites. And then when you're finished saving everything you want to look at later, you just click on the favorites button up here, and it will take you to your favorites where everything you have selected during that session is saved. And as long as you don't clear your browser history, they'll be there for you the next time you come back. But you have to use the same machine and the same browser. Another thing that's important for linking, if you wanted to link to this item, the reference URL is a good URL to use. So if you just click on reference URL, and then you can also get a little snippet of code and embed this on another website if you wanted to. Let's go down and actually look at the item right now. So this item is actually quite a large digital file, so I could zoom in on it. If I wanted to maximize the real estate on the screen, I can pull this down and see more of the image, and I can zoom around. And this, again, is a large image. I could zoom in a lot more, but I'm not going to right now. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about metadata that Ryan mentioned earlier. So here is the record for this image, and some metadata records are more rich than others. This one is quite detailed. We know who created it. We know around the date that it was taken. We've got a free text account of the image, some subject headings. All the people in the photograph are identified. We know it was taken in Hyde Park. And we know it was a photographic print from a glass plate negative. So this to me says that they scanned the photographic print, but the original source material was a glass negative. This record doesn't indicate the size of the original photographic print, but some records do absolutely tell you the size of the original material, and that can be really helpful because when you're talking about digital images, a poster could look exactly the same as a postcard online. So indicating what kind of source material and the size is a really helpful thing for users. Scrolling down, we see more information. Here, every record should have the name of the institution that contributed it and some contact information so you can get in touch with them if you need to. And this one has a copyright statement that lets you know that this item is in the public domain. And they just ask that you please credit them if you use it. We're going to cycle back around and talk about copyright and reuse a little later in this presentation. One nifty thing about this digital repository and most digital repositories, although I have seen some that don't have this feature, but I believe all three of the ones we're going to show you today do, where the metadata is hyperlinked. So you can click on a word or a term and it will execute another search across the collections. So I'm going to go ahead and click on carriages and coaches. And then that just ran a search across all of HRVH for anything that has that subject heading in it. And now when I scroll through the list, you'll see that we've got things from Bard College, Chester Historical Society, all different libraries and museums. Okay, from here I can again click on the first one. I showed you how to browse through pages. Once you're looking at an item after a search or a browse, you can use these buttons up top to browse item by item. And if you want to get back to your results, just click the word results. Okay, so that's kind of how you browse by collection. And I showed you some of the other little features of the site. I'm going to show you one other way that you can browse our collections. And that's if you use the browse option. You can browse by county. These are our major counties that we have represented. Or you can browse by these broad format types. I'm going to go ahead and browse by a topic. These are some broad topic categories that we came up with a bunch of years ago to kind of facilitate casual browsing on the site. So let's just start with military. And we get almost 900 results. And again, these will be from all collections. And I want to show you a couple other just kind of mechanical tools that you can use to filter down and narrow your results. So most repositories, at least the ones we're going to show you today, should have what is called facets. That's a way to kind of narrow down a search or a browse by particular metadata element. So I'm going to go ahead and click subject. And we'll do Civil Wars. Okay, so now I have everything that has to do with Civil Wars. Now I could have just done a search on the homepage for Civil War if that's what I knew I was interested in. But let's see another way that I can, from here, filter down even more and select the subject heading for Civil War correspondence. And now I should just be looking at our Civil War letters. So I went from about 200 from my initial military search to 81. Okay, I just want to show you real quick how documents work in HRVH. So if I select one, this letter has multiple pages, so I can navigate through the pages using the thumbnails over on the right. Okay, or using these previous and next buttons right here. If a document has been transcribed, you will see a tab to view the text. So if I didn't want to read the handwriting, I could just read the transcript. Another thing you can do is you can view image and text in this viewer side by side. And this could be really helpful for classroom use if you were using this with students. Okay. I'm going to close out of this. And I'm just going to do one search. I'm going to go back to our home page. Content DM supports what's called truncated searching. So you can put an asterisk after kind of the root of a word. This is really good if you're into farms. If you do farm with an asterisk, you'd get any record that mentions farm, farms, farmers, farming. I'm going to go ahead and do railroad, and it'll get me anything that mentions railroad or railroads. So I've got a little over 2,000 results. And let's go ahead. I'm going to show you another thing to change the display. It saved my 100 per page, but if I use this display options and change from a grid to a thumbnail, I lose some of the metadata. I just get thumbnails and titles, but this could be a good way to kind of, again, maximize real estate and scroll down quickly and see items that are of interest to you. And if you scroll down, we will find here images of railroad cars and trains, images of railroad stations and facilities, railroad workers, railroad construction, railroad accidents, and even horse railroads. You will also find other resources like waybills, maps, railroad schedules, and railroad car menus. So I'm going to go ahead and use the subject facet again and limit this to menus. So now I just see all of the railroad card menus that are in our collection. And as you start to use these facets, you'll see that it kind of builds these little breadcrumbs of your search up top. So I could, if I didn't want to look at menus anymore, I wanted to go back to my main railroad search, I can just exit out of the menus. And I'm back to everything that had to do with railroads. So that is all I wanted to show you today for HRVH, but I encourage you to come to the site and take a look around and see what you like. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Ryan for an overview of New York Heritage.
So New York Heritage Digital Collections is also built on Content DM, but we've recently upgraded to the new responsive version of Content DM, and we also did a massive overhaul of our front end as well. So there's some important differences between what Jen just showed you and what I'll be showing you, but fundamentally it's built on the same software. So New York Heritage Digital Collections, as I mentioned before, represents the remainder of New York State, other than the southeastern and metropolitan New York regions. We have over 700 collections contributed from 272 different institutions. So we have quite a few materials in here. On our main page, if you just want to jump right in and do a search, we have a search bar right here that will take you directly to items. You also have the ability to go through and do an advanced search. But what I'm going to show you today is some of the additional contextual information that we've been building up. So if you scroll down to Explore, there's several different entry points to browsing through our materials. You could, if you're looking for a collection by a specific institution, you could go to this page, our contributing organizations page, and either scroll through. You could filter by county or just search for their name and find them here. As you can see down here, these are the library councils that are contributing to New York Heritage. So if you want to find something in your region, that's a way to do it as well. But I'm going to go back to the main page and go into collections, and this is hopefully where we've been doing a lot of work to build this side of things and provide a little bit easier way to browse through collections. As you can see, you could scroll through and look through alphabetically the collections if you knew what you were looking for. We also have these faceted searches by topics, or type, or time period. But perhaps the most useful way to do this is to search using this. So I'm going to select contains all these words. So I have a little bit narrower search results, and I'm going to search for the Erie Canal. So what this is going to give me is results that correspond to the Erie Canal. And we have a number of collections about the Erie Canal, but say I'm more interested in when the improvements were done in the 1930s to create the barge canal. So if we click on time period here, this is going to facet the search down further. And now we're only looking at collections that have been identified as being in the 1930s. So I'll click on this first one, the 1935 Federal Improvement Aerial Survey. And this is an example of a collection landing page. We have a little bit of historical context, so a little bit of background information to understand the collection. And the scope of collection will give you a sense for what's actually in the collection. And then we have some collection facts over here on the left. The number of items, the years represented, collection owner, and then if you open this up, there's some more information down here as well as far as what subjects and stuff. You can search within this collection here, or what I'm going to do right now is just click on Explore this collection and go directly into the items. As you can see, this is quite a bit different from the Content DM that Jen just showed you. It's a lot of the same functionality is here. It's just laid out a little bit differently. You have your facets on the left, and you have your items here as well. You can see we have 237 items in this collection. I'm going to click through one of them. And this page also looks a little bit different, but the metadata is still here at the bottom. If this were a compound object or like a object with more than one page, you might see the number of the pages over here on the right, and maybe a transcript here as well. But this is just this is a map, so it doesn't have those sets of information. Much like Jen's example, we can zoom in and we can click on this expand icon, and then I'm using my scroll wheel to zoom in, but you could also zoom in here and you can find the exact house or whatever that you're trying to identify in this aerial shot. So I'm going to go back a couple of stages here to the collection landing page and point out how you can click through to the institution. So this is the owner of that collection, and you can see what other collections the Erie Canal Museum has available. You can see there's 3 here, and also importantly, this is where you would find some contact information if you had questions about this collection, or if you wanted permission to use some of these materials that they may have copyright clearance for. So that's a really quick overview of New York Heritage. As I mentioned, we recently switched over to this platform, so I'd like to direct you to the top of our page here. There's a couple of surveys. If you notice anything that's wrong, or if you want to give us some general feedback, we'd love to hear it. And I hope that you're able to go in and explore and try some things out. So I'm going to switch it over to Karen to go through digital culture of metropolitan New York.
Thanks, Ryan. So hi, everyone. My name is Karen, and I'm part of the digital projects team at the New York State Council that serves New York City and Westchester County. Like Ryan said, the council is the Metropolitan New York Library Council, more commonly referred to simply as Metro. We went down too many slides, sorry. Similar to how Hudson River Valley Heritage represents collections in the Central Arc Council region, this third platform I will be introducing, Digital Culture of Metropolitan New York, also known as DCMNY, only serves Metro. There are over 230 organizations belonging to the Metro network. Members with cultural heritage resources range in size and scope, like the Museum of Modern Art and Carnegie Hall, and academic institutions like Columbia University, the City Universities of New York, as well as specialized community organizations like the Pilsudski Institute of America and the Asian American Art Center. It should be noted here that many of our members host their own digital collections on their own institutional websites, so it should not be mistaken that DCMNY represents all digital collections in the New York City area. The collections on DCMNY represent the collections from institutions who have been awarded special Metro digitization grants or who have chosen to use our hosting service for other reasons. So what kind of primary source materials can you find in DCMNY? We have over 46,000 resources that are great for researchers, like historic images of New York City or documentation and ephemera from political rallies. We have digitized historic maps, historic event flyers from venues all around the city, postcards, advertisements, and brochures. But we also have interesting materials that aren't specific to New York City, like the 5-4 language imprints from the New York Historical Society collection about the extinct language of the Native American people bearing the same name. DCMY is not a curated platform, so like both HRVH and New York Heritage, the method for describing resources can differ widely per institution, which can affect search results, although we do offer guidelines to members for metadata creation. Let's go now to the DCMY website. Much of what my co-presenters Jen and Ryan covered in terms of navigation holds true for DCMY as well. The location or name of some of these navigational tools, however, might differ. We have the straightforward search field. You can see that you can either choose already here whether you want to search across all collections or within a single collection using this drop-down menu. You can also see from this drop-down that we currently have around 40 collections, and this number grows every year. There's also an advanced search. I won't show this here because I think this is something to explore once you're more familiar with the collections we have. There is also this carousel of images and featured collections area for fast access to collections. Like the collections menu on HRVH, DCMY has a main navigational link, Browse Collections. This leads you to a list of all the collections, providing a representational image and a short description of each. You can see the range here. Brooklyn College student handbills, LGBT bar guides from the LGBT Community Center's collections, artist correspondence with the Whitney Museum staff, posters for rights for Soviet Jews from the Yeshiva University. When you click on one of the collections here, it takes you to a page that has a short description of the collection and then lists the resources in that collection. The default view is this list view, but you can also use a grid view. If you want more extensive information on the collection itself, there's a link here under the short description, where the owning institution has provided more information about the collection and sometimes more information about the institution itself. So let's go ahead and use the search to start looking for actual record results. Let's search in all collections and use the search term Erie Canal, which I clearly have used before. So we're going to search across all collections here, and you can see up here that we're currently looking at the first 50 results of 1,050 results. I also want to add that in this area you have these two icons. If you want to download these results as you see them here, you can either download them as a CSV using this icon or as an RSS feed if you want to work with the data. Over on the left, you'll see you can sort by title or last modified if you want to see the most recent additions and changes. And you can filter by many different facets found on this side of the page. Jen already covered how to use facets, so let's just filter by genre to negatives, photographic, and start looking at one of the records. You'll see using that, we filtered down to only 10 results. When you click on an item, the record view looks very different from records in HRVH or in New York Heritage. As my colleagues mentioned, those run on a system called Content DM, whereas DCMNY runs on an open source platform called Islandora. The resource record has several tabs. The default tab consists of the representation of the object. If there are multiple representations, all of them will appear in this tab. The second tab, Object Description, is the actual description of the object. The extent of the description will differ institution by institution. Subject, location, size, the collection it belongs to. The terms in blue can be clicked on to see other records that include the same item with the same term. One feature here that differs from the other two repositories are these tabs that provide the record in MARC and MODS formats for those who want to work with the record data. So here we have MARC, and here we have MODS. There are also links to download the records as either MARC.xml or mods.xml. The next segment of this webinar will focus on an amazing digital collections resource that is a nationwide project. It's called the Digital Public Library of America, also known as DPLA, and it is a wonderful resource for locating materials from digital collections around the country. That's pretty powerful stuff because if you think about the regional platforms we introduced in the first half hour, those collections come from within our councils, and any search conducted on those platforms targets only the materials in those collections. Until DPLA, this was how digital primary source material could be accessed. For the most part, it was limited by what was on that single repository, usually only one institution's collection or some small aggregation of collections by microregion, university, or library. You not only needed to know what you wanted to search for, but where to search. Basically, you needed to know which archives, historical societies, libraries, etc. might have materials of interest to you. Search on DPLA searches across thousands of digital collections around the country, from small community archives in historical societies to large-scale collections in universities and public libraries. As of January 2018, there are almost 20 million objects on DPLA, with over 2,000 institutions contributing. You'll recall that I just mentioned in the segment about DCMNY that not all digital collections from our region are represented on DCMNY. DPLA is where your search will include many more of these collections from our region, like collections from MoMA, New York Public Radio, the American Museum of Natural History, or the New York Public Library. That having been said, it's worthwhile to take a closer look at what DPLA is so you know exactly what resources are included and how you should understand your search results. As a portal for the country's collections, DPLA operates on a hub model, a distributed network of independent hubs that form to help share the work of gathering primary source records from already existing digital collections around the country. Some institutions are large enough and have enough materials and manpower to be single hubs for themselves, like the New York Public Library and Hathi Trust. These are called content hubs. Others act as service hubs for a region or a particular topic, compiling resource records from many institutions to pass to DPLA. The regional hub for New York State and the one that serves the New York State Councils is the Empire State Digital Network, known by the acronym ESDN. ESDN operates out of the metro offices in New York City. It is one of over 35 hubs around the country. I want to emphasize that DPLA is not exhaustive. Not all digital collections in the U.S. have their records on DPLA. Only those that have chosen to participate and/or are able to meet the requirements of a service hub. Meeting these requirements is not always possible for institutions and is not always desired. You'll find that some of the collections on HRVH, DCMNY, and New York Heritage are not in DPLA because of this. It also bears emphasizing that records on DPLA are usually not as extensive in terms of the richness of metadata as on their originating collection platforms. All resource records on DPLA link back to an original record on a digital collection because the philosophy of DPLA is not to replace those digital collections in their function, but to aggregate and support the discovery of collection resources and drive traffic back to those original digital collections and holding institutions. In this way, DPLA is not a digital collection per se, it's an aggregator of records from already existing digital collections that provides a way to search across a mass number of collections around the country. So let's go ahead and look at DPLA as a platform. I'm going to go to DPLA first. As you can see, the search bar is tended to be very central to the user's navigation of the site. Let's start looking for Erie Canal resources on DPLA. The search results page gives you a nice clear way of understanding your results. Here on top, it shows that there were 4,096 results from over 120 contributing institutions. The number grows constantly because new collections and new objects are constantly being added. Generally, too, this upper area can remind you what search criteria you're using. It shows here Erie Canal, for example. Like the other platforms we introduced, you can change the number of records being displayed and also the sort order. On the left-hand side, we once again have facets that we can use to streamline our results. where the terms are listed in descending order of occurrence among the search results. There are a few facets here that I want to go over in particular since Jen already covered how to use facets in general. Subjects are found here. If you click on more, you'll notice that there are a lot of different terms being used, some from standardized controlled vocabularies, others not. That's both the beauty and the curse of some metadata on DPLA. This melting pot of terms not only reflects the great diversity of materials, but also the diversity of cataloging practices among the institutions holding these materials. That means that for some metadata fields like subject, terms that are similar in meaning have not been collapsed or related to one another, which on other platforms can typically be used to assist with navigation. The other facet I wanted to show is contributing institution, meaning the institution that has the item in its collection, like the Canal Society of New York State. This can be used to see materials from a particular institution, and there will often be many institutions included in your search results. Also for the New York State Regional Council, they will also appear in addition to the institution that's contributing. Below that is partner, meaning the hub. You can see here that the lion's share of resources matching Erie Canal come from the Empire State Digital Network, our hub, which makes sense since it's New York. Let's go ahead and filter down to resources provided by us at ESDN. A case for this might be a researcher in New York who wants to eventually visit the materials physically but can only travel to places in New York. And let's look again at the top area that provides feedback about your search. You can see now that it says it has been refined by ESDN. You can remove a refinement by clicking on the X. We now have our results filtered to those from the Empire State Digital Network. Let's look at the information provided in one result item in the list. In the example of this postcard, you can see it gives you an overview of the item. Type of resource here is image, the title on the Erie Canal. If there is creator information, it would be here under the title, and the same goes for date, and there's none here actually. And here's the description. Below it, you're already provided with a link to the original record that is the source of this record. But before we go there, let's go and look at the record on DPLA. This is what a record looks like on DPLA. You have all the metadata associated with the term that DPLA takes. If you click on a term like horses, it now gives you search results on DPLA using that term for that particular element, in this case as a subject. And up here, you also have arrows that you can use to navigate object records from your search. Here below, you have the link to the original digital collection record. In this case, the object came from the Canal Society of New York State, which is hosted on New York Heritage. And you can see that there is more metadata here than in the DPLA record, which is often the case, as I mentioned before. DPLA also provides other ways to navigate resources. So for example, you can use the map interface to conduct your search. If we type a search term up here, I've been using Jackson Pollock, I'll just grab it from here. It shows you a graphical representation by location information from each record. There are two broad groupings for Jackson Pollock resources, East Coast and West Coast, with the number of resources in that group displayed. If you zoom in, you can see that the number distribution becomes more granular. At any zoom level, you can click on one of these circles, and a window opens showing you the objects belonging to that geographical group. And from here, you can even access the record. So here you have a photo of Jackson Pollock. Not all resources, however, have location information attached, so this type of map interface is more useful for some types of searches than others. So like here, A second way to navigate objects graphically is by using the timeline, which uses the dates from resource records. This default timeline page gives you an overview of the distribution of objects with date metadata on DPLA. Already, this is very interesting without even putting in your own search term. You can use this slide navigator above to see a different cross-section enlarged in the frame below. And you can scroll over the bars in the enlargement to see how many objects are part of that year. Like with the map, when you click on the bar, you have a pop-up list of objects. Let's type in a term like jazz. You can now see the distribution of objects with jazz in the title or elsewhere in the metadata displays a very different distribution, very 20th century leaning, which you would expect. Now that you know some of the ways you can search across collections on DPLA, I wanted to introduce you to some special features. The first feature I would like to introduce are primary source sets. These are actually designed and reviewed by teachers on DPLA's Education Advisory Committee and intended for educational use. Topics range from deaf and blind schools in the 19th century to pop art in the U.S. to Ralph Ellison's The Invisible Man to the Equal Rights Amendment. They are more like kits than just sets, as you will see. They include a selection of objects on DPLA and how to use the objects in an instructional setting. Primary source sets are definitely something worth exploring for educators, both for teaching about the topics themselves and about the value of primary sources as tools for research and learning. Another feature of DPLA are the curated exhibitions. Exhibitions provide more in-depth looks at topics using resources on DPLA as illustrations. You'll see here too, like with primary source sets, there is a wide range of topics covered. Let's take a look at an exhibition curated by one of the ESLN councils, Winnelark, that was recently launched to commemorate 200 years of the Erie Canal. You can see that exhibitions are separated into sections. Each section typically consists of several pages, so here there are 4. And you can see the resources that relate to the essay on the current page. One final feature I wanted to mention is the API that DPLA provides. API stands for Application Programming Interface. People often ask, what is an API? Basically, when a repository has an API, a way has been provided to interact with the record data in the repository. So in this case, DPLA has provided a way for people to access the object record data to reuse and explore. You can batch download the data or query a specific subset of data, or even live query the data if you want to build it into another web application. How to do this goes beyond the scope of this webinar for sure, but we wanted to make sure people are aware of its existence and that DPLA provides documentation on how to access the data, either via web page calls or programmatically with scripts written in languages like Python, Ruby, or PHP. This is an example of a plugin developed using the DPLA API. It's an add-on extension that you can install to Wikipedia called WikipediaPLA. Anytime you look at an article on Wikipedia, it will show you a link on the page, search the DPLA. When you click on it, it displays a list of objects found on DPLA using the article's title. Another really nice use of data via the API is Dean Farr's Metadata Explorer. It builds word clouds based on the term you provide and allows you to compare frequency of occurrence of the term among DPLA's resources. As you can see in this example, the word alien returned a cloud that shows the greatest frequency of occurrence for the term comes from records from the National Archives and Records Administration. So the API can be useful for developers who want to build the data into an app or for digital humanists and researchers who might want to look at the metadata itself as an object of inquiry. Hopefully this introduction to DPLA and the digital collections platforms of ESLN can help you decide whether they're resources you may want to use for your research or in the classroom, or for the reference librarians and creators of LibGuides listening, whether any of these platforms can be included among your recommended resources. I'm going to turn it over to Jen now, who will talk about the important issue of use rights and some newer conventions being applied specifically to materials in digital collections.
So the DPLA is awesome, and if you haven't checked it out, please go do so. And their primary goal, obviously, is to aggregate all of these resources into one portal for researchers and the public to discover. But a secondary goal, and probably equally as important for them, is to promote and encourage the reuse of these resources, which is why they've worked with educators to develop the curriculum sets, why they've worked with their partners to develop the exhibitions, and why they make all of that data in DPLA available through an API. Making these historical resources more discoverable through our repositories and through this national aggregation has naturally increased the interest in and desire to use them in a variety of ways. Sometimes simply looking at a resource online is enough to satisfy an information need, but oftentimes people want to get their hands on a digital copy of a resource and do something with it. Uses range from the personal to the public, and some uses are more traditional, like publishing these resources in books or articles or using them on TV or film, while others are more unique and creative. If you are on Facebook, you've probably seen classical art memes show up in your feed. Even if you don't follow the page, over 4 million other people do, and they are shared like crazy. Animated GIFs, or GIFs if you prefer the hard G, are all the rage these days. Last week I watched a bunch of my friends have an entire Facebook conversation using animated GIFs, and it was pretty hilarious. The National Archives has gotten into the game. They have a channel on Jiffy with about 270 animations that they've created from their collections, and they have been viewed almost 500 million times. Yes, almost 500 million times. In the chat box, I'm going to go ahead and throw in the link to that page. You should go check it out. It's pretty hilarious. So in each year, speaking of animated GIFs, DPLA has participated in an international contest called GIF It Up. They use the hard G. With other national digital libraries, where they invite the public to come in and create these animations from resources in the respective repositories that participate. The DPLA even provides online tutorials for how to create these animations. Items selected for the contest must again come from these national repositories, and they must be in the public domain or otherwise have no known copyright restrictions, no known restrictions on use. Public domain works are works that are not protected by copyright so that they can be freely used by anyone for any reason. And works fall into the public domain a number of different ways. Most obviously is when their copyright term expires. There are some works that are not protected by copyright to begin with. That is a topic for another webinar, so that's all I'm going to say about that. But again, to create these animations, you're really creating a new work. So you have to work with resources that have been identified as not having any copyright or reuse restrictions. So one of the things that DPLA noticed after aggregating the first several million records into the repository and wanting to do these competitions, this GIF It Up competition, and reuse works in different ways, was that sometimes it was difficult to determine if items were in the public domain or not based on the information that was coming through in our records. DPLA only requires 2 metadata fields, the title and the rights statement, and which, rights is where you would typically find information about copyright and reuse. And what they found is oftentimes the information we were sending them was not real clear about copyright status. They found a lot of contact information, citation information, requests to credit the holding institutions, which is all good information, but sometimes it was just it was missing, like, what is the copyright status of this work? This is not an issue isolated to one type of organization or one location in the country. This is kind of a national issue, and for the last couple of years we've been kind of having a national discussion around this. Copyright is complicated and confusing, and so the DPLA decided to do something to help those of us in the cultural heritage community who are digitizing our collections to better and more clearly and more accurately express copyright and reuse information. So what they did is they worked with national and international partners to develop a standard set of rights statements. It's a website, so this standard does live on the web. And there are 12 standard statements. Some of them, because this is an international standard, some of them aren't intended to be used here in America. But if you click on the statements, they are broken into 3 general categories: in copyright, no copyright, and this gray area, because there's certainly a lot of gray area in our cultural heritage resources. So let me just show you one and show you how this works. So here's just the basic in copyright. How about this one? In copyright, educational use permitted. So each of these statements has its own web page. So here is the full statement for the in copyright educational use permitted. And it says this item is protected by copyright or related rights. You are free to use this item in any way that is permitted by the copyright and related rights legislation that applies to your use. In addition, no permission is required from the rights holder for educational uses. For other uses, you need to obtain permission from the rights holder. So that's how this works. Each of the 12 statements has a URL that links to a page just specifically for that statement. I am going to show you an example of a rights statement applied to a record in Hudson River Valley Heritage. So this record here, this is a photograph that was created by Harriet Martin Day around the turn of the last century. She died in 1949. So copyright for this type of resource, this is an unpublished work of a personal author, and they are protected for the life of the creator plus 70 years. As far as this organization could tell, Harriet had no children, so locating heirs is close to impossible because she died in 1949. So who do you go to? The copyright is still protected for another couple years. 70 years after her death is next year. So they applied the statement from Rights Statements that says in copyright, rights holders unlocatable or unidentifiable. And if you click here, it will take you to that statement on the rightstatements.org website, and you can read more about this statement and what it means. So in 2020, this particular photograph and her whole collection will fall into the public domain, and then we'll have to update the rights statements to the no copyright United States statement with the new URL. So you'll start to see these URLs show up in rights fields and metadata records soon, but we are in transition. So I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute because we're working on it. But eventually you should see a lot of those. And one of the cool things about using a standard like this, I think one of the end goals is to be able to facet on this copyright information. We certainly haven't done enough of these yet to make that an option in DPLA, but once we're kind of all on board with this, then after you do a search, you could then filter by, what's public domain or what can I use for educational purposes and so on. I just wanted to show you kind of where we were going with copyright. I showed you a statement in the earlier record from the FDR library that hasn't yet applied the right statements, but they did let you know it was in the public domain and they just asked to be credited. Okay, so just some general principles and tips when trying to figure out copyright and reuse from the user perspective, or for those of you who help patrons by providing reference. Users are ultimately responsible for determining if their use is allowable under copyright laws and obtaining permission from copyright holders when needed. In most cases, digital reproductions don't get a new copyright. The copyright and reuse status of the original is the same for the digital. This was one of the big misconceptions in the early days of digitization. So this is something that the DPLA did notice when they started aggregating our records, is sometimes we're claiming copyright on the digital version when that is really not allowed. The original copyright carries through to the digital. There are some rare and unique exceptions where use is limited on digital versions of even public domain resources, but that is not the case for the vast majority of stuff you'll find, at least in the 3 New York repositories we showed you today. You should always look at the metadata record to see what it says regarding rights and reuse. You will see some records that use the standard rights statements that I just showed you. And while we are transitioning to rights statements, you will find lots of other types of information in rights fields. Some of it will be more helpful than others. At the very least, you should find the name of and contact information for the organization that contributed the resource so you can contact them directly for more information regarding copyright and reuse. You might also find citation information and or a request to credit the holding institution if you reuse a work from their collection. Proper citation and credit is always a good practice. And on our last slide, I'm about to turn it back over to Ryan, but we have a slide at the end that has some resources for you to go back and peruse. And one of them is a wonderful chart that was created by the Cornell University Library Copyright Information Center. The chart is called Copyright Term and the Public Domain in the U.S. Earlier, when I was showing you that Harriet Martin Day photograph, I mentioned, that photograph is going to fall into the public domain in a couple years based on the type of work it is and the type of authorship it was. So this chart actually details all the complexity of copyright terms in the United States. For published work, it can be pretty complex. So if you are a researcher, or if you provide reference services to patrons, or if you are digitizing from your own collections, this chart is a super helpful resource in helping you make copyright determinations. And just one more thing before I turn it back over to Ryan is, if you would like more information on copyright, keep an eye out for an announcement from the Documentary Heritage Program for the state of New York, otherwise known as DHPSNY, D-H-P-S-N-Y. They are going to be hosting a copyright webinar this spring that will really take a deep dive into the law and copyright terms and exemptions and everything you want to know about copyright for cultural heritage work. So now I will turn it over to Ryan to wrap it up.
Thanks, Jen. So this slide, we have the URLs for the repositories that we discussed throughout the course of this webinar. And on the right side, there's a couple others that we didn't quite get to, but might also be relevant as you're working through some historical research. The first one is Empire Archival Discovery Cooperative, and this is a repository of finding aids, a statewide repository of finding aids. So if you're not familiar with a finding aid, or what a finding aid is, it's basically an inventory and description of a physical collection that's held at an institution. So by using a finding aid, you might discover that there are a number of boxes of materials related to the subject that you're investigating, and this is more for using physical collections. Some of these materials might have been digitized, but really you're using finding aids in Empire Archival Discovery Cooperative to determine whether it might be worth you traveling to that institution to look through their physical materials. This website's still something we're in active development, so you'll see a lot of additional materials added to it in the near future, and also some great changes that we're working on. The second resource is New York State Historic Newspapers, and this is the name's pretty kind of says it all. This is a repository of newspapers from throughout New York State. I think there's over 7 million pages available in this website. Hudson River Valley Heritage has some newspapers, but you won't really find many, if any, newspapers other than clippings in the other 3 repositories listed here. So if this is another great resource if you're looking for some of that contextual information, or some of the like obituaries, especially genealogists love the resources available there. So as we're wrapping up, I would like to invite any of you who work at institutions that may have collections that you would be interested in potentially contributing to these repositories to contact your local Library Council representative. This page that is linked to on this slide is a New York Heritage, but we list the representatives from all 9 library councils, and also have that handy map from one of my earlier slides to help you figure out which council is yours if you're not aware. So each council does their process a little different through that. So reaching out to them individually will help you get on board, and you can contribute to all the great things we just went through in this webinar. With that, I'd like to thank everybody for attending. We are going to be sticking around and answering questions in the chat window. So if you had any questions that you were hoping to get answers for, please feel free to ask them there. And Jen, Karen, and I will do our best to answer, or some of the other ESLN folks that are on the webinar.